So last weekend, I finished my corner of questionable decisions, and when I was putting my dust collector back together, I realized I really didn't like the hose storage. I had something right here. It's this. I had this mounted to the wall right there, and I would just kind of coil the hose up on it. The big problem with it is the hose is relatively heavy. It's this thing. So it's a 4-inch inner diameter hose, and this is about 20 feet long, relatively heavy. It's got this nice little rockler handle on the end of it. Plugs directly into my table saw and other things, but just kind of draped over this silly little thing, it just doesn't really work out that well. So I started looking online to see if there was some other solution out there, and I could not for the life of me find anything that already existed. Like, I was thinking of kind of like those hose reel things that you see that just kind of come out, it's a little curved. Nothing like that exists. So I'm going to have to make something. And one of the ideas that came into my mind is kind of how you coil up a cord on like a vacuum cleaner or something like that. I want something similar to that that uses this whole space. And there's been something that I've been wanting to try with 3D printing. So I'm going to kind of incorporate all these things together. So let's start by building kind of a proof of concept mock-up and then go from there. So at this point, I'm not really sure if this is going to fit or if this is going to work. So I just kind of made some assumptions and threw something together really quick. I have a board that's about 4 feet long, which is about what that space can accommodate. Threw in some T-nuts, threw in some threaded rod, and you can see on one end it extends a little bit further. That's going to be to kind of hang it on the wall in one of those existing holes. And then I'm just using 4-inch PVC pipe as spacers. These are going to be the kind of arms that stick out that support the tubing. I found out that for a 20-foot tube section, I'm going to need about 2 runs. So the PVC is about 8 inches or, double the diameter of the tubing. And I'm just doing some really quick 3D printed parts to secure everything in place. All of this is going to change. I just needed something really quick just to kind of test out some concepts. And once we get this together, hang it on the wall, see if there's enough room and see if it's even worth going any further with it. There's no reason to overthink anything at this point. I am a big fan of 3D modeling. I 3D model everything, but sometimes there's just no substitute for a physical mock-up, especially for something like this. You just really need to make it, put it in the space, look at it, touch it, interact with it, and see how it's going to work. There just really isn't a good way around it for some things. So overall, I think this is going to work out. There's a couple things that I want to change. It's a little bit too long. This is just way too close to the floor, so it's kind of difficult to get the hose up underneath of it, even if this piece was movable. Also, this is a little bit too high. I really want this to dangle a little bit farther. I want it to be kind of down here. So if we make this whole thing shorter, both of those problems will be solved. So I'll take, 6 inches or a foot off of it, and then this should be much further down, and it'll be more off the floor. It is a little bit tight in this area, but that's perfectly fine. Nothing else can really go here. This is really the only space for this, so I'm okay with it. It's a little bit too close to the control box for the dust collector, but I actually use the remote key fobs more than anything, so I'll just stick to using these, and you can still access it. Although I do have an idea to kind of bring these in a little bit, and this is, just kind of resting here. But other than that, everything looks good. I want to keep this space open because I have a lot of accessories. So I'm going to make some mounts to kind of put these on the inside. And I'm waiting for some of the wands to be delivered, the long tubey things. So those will go in here. The rest of the accessories will go in there. So I think everything looks good. The next step is to figure out this mechanism because that's kind of critical and that's the design feature that I really want to focus on. So let's go mock that up and I'll show you a prototype. In order to make removing and replacing the hose as easy as possible, ideally I want this to kind of swing out of the way, remove the hose, swing back into position, the exact same way that the cord on your vacuum cleaner works. Now, I could just use the threaded hole in here and just kind of, unscrew it a little bit, remove the hose, and then put it back. But it's never really gonna go back to that exact same position, and over time, maybe this weakens and maybe this is the tight position. So it's really not that elegant of a solution. The other way to do it would be to add some sort of detent and spring load this so it kind of springs out of the way, goes over, snaps in place, and it's basically like a bistable position to where it's stable here and stable there, and it has to come up over that spring. That's another way to do it, but I have another solution. I want to try using these ball detents. Let me show you what I came up with for a proof of concept. There's nothing better than a good proof of concept, am I right? So I've got this knob, and I've got one of the ball detents pressed inside of it. These things have a 10mm body and an 8mm ball. And I have this mating cup that has 8 little detents modeled into it. So you just throw this screw in the back, throw on the washer. I'm kind of using this just as a spacer and kind of like a bearing. That goes in like that, and then there is a lock nut in the top. I originally found these a long time ago when I was searching for something else and just kind of filed it in the back of my head. I knew these would come in handy for something, but this is the first time I've actually used them. And here we go. And that is exactly what I'm looking for. It has a nice, satisfying click to it. It's pretty tight when it's in the locked position. It doesn't really want to go in the intermediate position. And it's really just satisfying to use. So I think this is going to work great. I'm going to make some modifications and change this up a little bit. One thing I notice is when you're using just one of these, the spring force will kind of press it the opposite way, and it will kind of rub against the opposing wall. So you really want 2 of these opposing each other, so it kind of leaves everything a little bit more centered. But I think this is going to work quite well. Of course, for the final version, I'm only going to have 2 detents, so it has basically a 180-degree swing, but I think it's time for the final design. So let me go mock some stuff up. All right, so I spent way too much time modeling all this, but this is what I came up with. It's very similar to the mock-up, but I made some adjustments and added all the pieces for the tool caddy in the middle. As you see, I have the 2 wand extensions. I've got a little adapter that I'm going to make out of TPU. This is for like a little right-angled brush. That's for the floor wand. And then the crevice tool can actually fit inside of there. And then inside these PVC pipes, we have one of these that just kind of bolts everything together and helps stabilize the PVC pipe. And then we have the rotating mechanism up here, and I'll show you that in person. So now it's time to actually start printing all this stuff out. And while that's printing, I'll go ahead and make this piece out of wood. I had a piece of scrap plywood on hand. I needed something that was 4.5 inches wide and about 46 inches long. And this was the only piece I had that was thick enough. So I'm just cutting this down on the table saw and then bringing it over to the miter saw to cut down to length. Each end of the board has a radius on it that matches the 3D printed part as well as the PVC pipe. So the first step to that is using one of the 3D printed parts to trace that contour. And at the same time, what I'm doing is using a transfer punch to punch the center location. Then I can use that to drill out the center hole. So I bring it over to the drill press, drill out the center hole. This will be used to install a T-nut. So I can flip it around, use a Forstner bit, make a little pocket on the back, and then insert the T-nuts. Now that the T-nuts are installed, I can bring it back over to the table saw and I can roughly cut the radius. I'm just using a jigsaw right now to kind of cut those ends off. I could have done a lot of this on a CNC machine, but I kind of wanted to do this manually for really no reason whatsoever. But once I get those edges cut off, then I can just use a router flush trim bit to kind of cut off the excess. And That last step really didn't work out the way I wanted it to. This is the only flush trim bit I have. It's actually like an offset bit. It's made to cut offsets, and it's huge, and it really doesn't cut that well on plywood, but I just took it really, really slow, got the bulk of it off there, and then just used a sander for the rest of it. But overall, it worked out okay. I only had 2 ends to do, and yeah, this thing doesn't need to look perfect. Speaking of not needing to look perfect, the next step was to sand down the outside of the PVC pipes. These are cut roughly to 8.5 inches long, and if you've ever bought PVC pipes from a home center, they're always really, really rough. It's hard to find them in decent condition, so I figured everything else is going to look pretty decent on this, so I might as well sand these down. I'm just using like 220 and then 400. There's really no need to do any of this, but I felt like doing it anyway. So now I finally have all the 3D printed parts done. I have a little bit of PLA, 1 TPU, and the majority of this is ASA. One of the cool things about ASA is that even when you print it on a perfectly clean build platform, when it releases, you get some stresses along the bottom or the first layer, and you can use a torch to release this stress, and you can actually see the white go away. It's kind of interesting. This isn't like residue from a glue stick. This is actually the stresses from that first layer, and just a quick wave of some heat gets rid of them, which is pretty slick. I really don't need to do this step because most of these faces aren't even going to be seen, but it looks really cool on camera, so why not show it? The parts here are a collection of ASA, PLA, and we got that 1 TPU part, the black shiny one. The TPU is just a hose adapter. It's the adapter for the extension wands into the little Rockler hose adapter that I have. And on the far left, those big long tabs, those are PLA. Everything else is ASA. And the reason I did ASA for the majority of the parts is because a lot of them are going to be under tension. And when you take PLA and put it under tension, it will eventually creep or deform into that force that you're applying into it. And that's a bad thing for these purposes. So I just decided to go with ASA for everything. The outer tabs are not going to be in any tension, they're not going to see any force or any load, so those were perfectly fine in PLA. And since they're kind of long and skinny, they're more prone to warping, so it was just easier printing them out of PLA. Both the ABS and PLA are both Galaxy Black from Prusa, either Galaxy Black ASA or Galaxy Black PLA, and they look almost identical when you print them, which is kind of cool. So here's a closer look at these outer tabs. These are the pieces that are going to be actually holding on the hose onto the reel. I already have the little ball detents installed. They just kind of are a very tight press fit, and they're just kind of a little bit annoying to get in there, but once they're in there, they're good. And then you have the mating cup. This will sit on top of the PVC pipe. And as you can see, there is a bit of a lip that goes all the way along. And then you have a little bit of a detent right there, and then 180, one on the other side. And then opposing that, you have mounting holes, one there and one there. Those will actually attach to the PVC pipe to keep this from rotating around. Other than that, there are actually no fasteners. You just use the ball detents themselves, snap it into place, align it into the little detents inside. 180, 180. These work really, really well. There's obviously a little bit of rubbing because face on face, but yeah, that'll wear down. That'll be perfectly fine. I didn't want to do a bunch of bearings or anything like that. These kind of have like, I'm calling it a safety feature. These can just break away so you don't end up breaking any of these pieces. But yeah, 180, 180, and they pull right off. Nice and cool. I also integrated some of these ball springy boys inside some of the tool holders. So this is the one for the little brush. Same kind of thing. That works out really well. And then in this main component, this is for the crevice tool. Same concept. So yeah, really happy with how those turned out. Now all I need to do is assemble everything. The assembly of this was pretty straightforward, but I definitely learned a little bit assembling the first one, so I got a little bit better at the second one, and that kind of is always the case. So this is going to be hard to explain, but when I designed this, the detents on the top tab kind of stop, I guess, parallel to that main wood piece, and so everything needs to be aligned just right. And since you assemble it from the bottom up, it's kind of tricky to align because you don't really know what the alignment's going to be like until the very end. So what I did is I assembled everything, then flattened it, then took it apart, screwed in the base piece, and then reassembled it, if that makes sense. I'll try and show that here in the video. And if anyone was wondering what that yellow piece was from earlier, you can see that it's actually a drill guide for drilling the outside holes in the PVC tube. Those are used to kind of align everything vertically. And if you get those in exactly the right place, you don't need to worry about any of the alignment. Everything will line up, but it's kind of impossible to get things perfectly in the right place. So you just kind of leave that bottom loose, adjust it, then screw it in place once that top tab is perfectly parallel with the rest of the assembly. So here's what it looks like right now. Everything is aligned. These move the way that they're supposed to, and they can come off, which is good. So the last and final thing before I mount this is to add all the tools. I have all the tool holders here. So you've got this one for the brush, this one for the floor mounts. That one's going to kind of go like there. That one's going to go there. This is the TPU sleeve for the dust right hose. So this kind of goes in like that, a little tight. That one goes in there, and then one of the wands goes in that end, so I can adapt all this stuff to a 2.5-inch shop vac hose, which is much easier to get than the 4-inch stuff. So I'm going to put this all together, get this mounted, and then put it on the wall. Something like that. I'm going to get all this screwed down, and then we'll put it on the wall, and we'll be done. Since I have this whole thing modeled up, I was fully intending to precisely measure the location of every hole and make sure everything was perfectly centered and lined up. But what I'm not showing you is that during one of these takes while I was filming this video, one of my SD cards actually physically broke inside my camera. There was plastic left behind inside the SD card slot, and it actually caused the camera to not read SD cards anymore. After about 2 hours of messing with this, I finally figured out that I could put a piece of tape on an SD card to kind of shim it into place to hit the contacts right, and that's the only way that my camera now works, which is amazing. I'm not very happy about this, so at this point it's just kind of like get it done, move on, and throw everything in the trash. So I just went really quickly, lined everything up by eyeball, screwed it down, and we're going to end this video. The installation of this wasn't too bad. Out of all the designing and over-engineering I did for this, I realized I didn't put any mounting. So I just used a couple of the screws that I used to hold the first 3D printed parts on, took out a screw, drilled through it, and used those as mounting. It worked just fine. I don't have any studs in this location, so it's going to be drywall anchors anyway, and it really doesn't need that much because it's not holding that much weight. And now that it's finally mounted, I can fill it up with all the tools, put the hose on there, and we're good to go. And overall, I am very happy with how this turned out. This is dead wasted space that I had no other use for. It's a little bit tight in there, but that's totally fine. It's just kind of this weird dust collection corner, and that's the only thing that really needs to go here. Earlier in the video, I talked about I was going to do something. I had some ideas about how to keep this hose closer. I was going to do magnets because the wire that runs through this hose is actually magnetic. So I was going to do a couple little magnet pods that would just kind of suck this in. it's already over-engineered enough. It's fine as it is. I am done with this project. I need to move on to other things. This was supposed to just be a couple-hour thing, and it turned into an entire weekend. You know how that goes. So, as always, thanks for watching. Check out the links down below. I have the design files for this, as well as all my other designs for the workshop and all the organization stuff I've done. That's on Printables as well as Maker World. Links down below. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video. And if you've ever wondered what it takes to make one of those clickbaity YouTube thumbnails, stay tuned. This is what it looks like behind the scenes. Thanks for watching. Bye.